GCHC. And most of all, thank you GCHC for providing undergraduates like myself the opportunity to present our hard work at a formal event. My presentation today will be on the 17th century philosopher Gottfried Leibniz and the prior influence of the Neoplatonic and the Scholastic school on his system. I have cut down the paper that I submitted to GCHC so that I do not go over the allotted time. Therefore, if one is already familiar with Leibniz and notices that I'm not mentioning this or that, rest assured that it is probably in my original paper. So first of all, who was Gottfried Leibniz? Well, he was a philosopher, he was a mathematician, he was a Christian theologian who lived in 17th century Germany. He co-founded calculus with Sir Isaac Newton, though he is not as well known as Newton. At the time when he was writing, he was most known for being a philosophical rationalist. This means that he believed there is innate knowledge in humans, and that this knowledge informs how we perceive the world. Later philosophers, like Immanuel Kant and G.W.F. Hegel, were influenced by Leibniz. Kant was most known in the field of ethics and epistemology. Hegel's major influence was in the science of metaphysics and political philosophy. With this out of the way, let me lay out my thesis statement, which will hopefully make sense by the end of the presentation. Gottfried Leibniz developed the concept of the monad from the Neoplatonists and from the Scholastics. He developed a hierarchy of being to explain how the monads are organized and expressed in the world. Although scholars often see these two schools at odds with one another, I argue that Leibniz saw a unity of the two. What is Neoplatonism and Scholasticism? Well, Neoplatonism combines Plato's teachings with various pagan belief systems or Christianity. The most notable member is St. Augustine of Hippo. Scholasticism combines Aristotle's teachings with Christianity. The most notable member is St. Thomas Aquinas. So let's get on to section 1, the monad. The monad is an infinite, irreducible, and simple substance, which you might think of as an atom, and that is a fine image, but I should be clear that Leibniz did not ever say the monad is any specific shape. The infinite extension of the monad is the immaterial distinction of it. The finite expression it operates with other monads is the material distinction. In the world, we see the interrelations of monads according to Leibniz. These monads combine and form composites based on the degree of perfection that each monad holds. An individual monad taken on itself is a unity which structures the multiplicity that it encompasses. What this means is that all events that will occur to the monad are intrinsic to its being. It does not rely on any other identity to present itself. Leibniz develops the concept of the monads unfolding from Plato's dialogue Meno. The pertinent part of the dialogue is the discussion between Socrates and Meno's slave boy. Plato uses this to introduce a concept known as recollection. Basically, knowledge that is gained in our finite life is a recollection of knowledge that is gained before this life. Plato believes our soul is immortal and once had all knowledge. So-called knowledge gained through interaction with the sensory world always remains on a lesser ontological, meaning that it is a lesser realm of existence, and it is on a lesser epistemic level, meaning that it is on a lesser level of knowledge than the knowledge that we had before we were born. Leibniz uses the term windowless, quote unquote, to refer to the monads unfolding. Since monads are closed and self-sufficient systems, again, because the monads have all the events that will occur to them already in the identity of the monad, communication can only occur between these monads insofar as the given perfection of one monad and the other involved in forming a composite influence each other upon contact. These composites, again, are what we see in the world in everyday life as the already expressed monad in co-being with other monads. A monad that will take dominance in a composite is a priori the more perfect monad. A priori is a term to mean a truth which is derived from the mind and not a truth from the external world. Leibniz's use of a priori is like what Immanuel Kant would later call the synthetic a priori truth. For instance, if a predicate B remains outside of the concept of a subject A, then this is a synthetic a priori statement. More concretely, if you say a cat is fat, the cat is a subject and is fat is the predicate. Therefore, is fat remains outside of the concept of cat. So, if this is a true statement, quote unquote, it is a synthetically true statement. For Kant, again, this type of statement is one which has its truth outside of sensory experience. However, although Leibniz agreed with Kant that these types of truths exist, Kant did not argue what will later be introduced, that an a priori truth applies to all possible worlds. Throughout Leibniz's metaphysics, he uses the language of harmonious. This influences one of his most discussed ideas, that this world is the best of all possible worlds. This belief follows from what has been established, that everything existing in our world is of more perfect monads that have extended upon the less perfect monads. Therefore, everything that exists in the universe is the most perfect it can possibly be at this given point in time. Section 2, proof of God through metaphysical contingency. If the universe is the best of all possible worlds, Leibniz believes there must be a reason for how the universe continues to exist. In this case, he develops a cosmological argument for God. This argument argues a necessary and contingent being to explain the continued existence of the universe. To make this argument, he relies on two fundamental principles. Those are the principle of sufficient reason, I shall call this the PSR for short, and the principle of non-contradiction. I will call this the P&C for short. The PSR states that there must be an underlying cause or force, which continues the existence of something if something is to continue its existence. A simple example, if you imagine a cannon shoots a cannonball, what fires the cannonball, what continues its force expressed in the air, is the cannon. If there is not enough force expressed onto the cannonball will fall to the ground. This can be taken to mean, in this analogy, that things will begin to disappear and there will be no universe if there is nothing to continue the existence of the universe. The P&C states that if a contradiction arises in determining the truth of the statement, then the statement cannot be true. In formal terms, there cannot be X and non-X at the same time. From the PSR, there must be an underlying explanation for continued existence. From the P&C, there also cannot not be a God if there is a necessity for a metaphysical being to ground the continued existence of the universe. Therefore, the universe must have something outside itself which grounds its continued existence. For Leibniz, this was the Christian God. If there is a necessary being, and that being is thought to be greater than all that is in the universe, then a hierarchy to organize this being must be established with God at the top. Section 3, the hierarchy of being and Neoplatonic oneness in Leibniz. The hierarchy of being for Leibniz is like the great chain of being in the scholastic tradition. The great chain of being for the scholastics broadly goes as follows. At the bottom you have non-living matter, then plant life, human life, angels, and then God at the top. Even though God is at the top, he has communication and connection with all lower levels of the hierarchy, but only humans and angels can cognize him. The hierarchy of being that Leibniz organizes all existence through is not provided as an exact list in his work, but I can lay out a sketch. The mind nomad is God, and this is the central monad of humans. This is the central monad of humans because humans are the only finite creature which has the ability to have communication with God. And according to Christianity, they are made in God's image. God himself, according to Leibniz, is the monarch of minds, or the most rational of the rational. The next level is the non-rational monad. This is the dominant monad and the composites that animals inhabit, since they do not have truths for knowing about God, but they are conscious beings. At the bottom of the hierarchy is the bare monad, which is only in non-living objects like chairs and tables. Leibniz gives us a concise analogy on the difference between intelligent substances and those that do not have any intelligence at all. In the Discourse on Metaphysics, he says that the difference is as great, quote, between a mirror and someone who sees, unquote. Besides the scholastic hierarchy of being, the Neoplatonic one also clearly influences this concept of the monad. Such oneness implies that unity structures the multiplicity of the monad, and that it structures how the monad unfolds all events from itself. Here, for some scholarly background, Leibniz likely follows in what is a more Platonist direction of the Platonist tradition. Since the monad seems beyond being, that is, a transcendence to being, which also surrounds our concept of being as a whole. Section 4, the Christian Trinity in scholasticism in Leibniz. The one which surrounds the universe and ushers itself by a relationship of contingency, to continue the existence of the universe is organized in the triune nature of the Christian God according to Leibniz. Leibniz derives his view on the Trinity, in part, from St. Anselm's analogy of the Nile River that rose to prominence in the scholastic tradition. The Nile River in Egypt is at once a river, a spring, and a lake, yet there are not three Niles, there is one. This one Nile is the analogy for one God, or in Neoplatonic terms, the Godhead. Following the classic Christian Trinity, God is distinguished between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, yet through this logical analogy, he remains without contradiction and persists as a whole for all demonstrations or manifestations of himself. Section 5. The Trinity for Neoplatonism and Leibniz. Along with scholasticism, the unity that Leibniz sought with Neoplatonism for his Trinitarian doctrine can be examined in relation to St. Augustine's understanding of the Trinity. There is he that loves, or God the Father. There is he which is loved, or Jesus or Son, and love itself, or Holy Spirit. What this means for Leibniz is that everything existing in the world has some degree of goodness, again, perfection, since only a trinity of love would bestow goodness. My conclusion: the metaphysics and theology of Gottfried Leibniz issues many points of unintentional synthesis between both schools of scholasticism and Neoplatonism. The Neoplatonic one and the scholastic chain of being find a home together in the canon of Leibniz. The one is regarded as the windowless monad and the system of monads that this partakes in. The hierarchy of being is the organization of monads to produce this system and paves the theological rigor towards the triune God of Christianity. With the establishment of the triune God, Leibniz points us back towards the Neoplatonic one as the organization of God himself. Through this unity, the scholarly consensus was upheld that Leibniz remains a rationalist due to his consistent use of a priori reasoning. Thank you all again for attending, and I implore you to read a translation of Gottfried Leibniz's Monadology and engage critically with his thoughts.
Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask?
I guess,
Yeah.
why do you think he's not better known?
I think because he had some crazy ideas.
It seems like he's not, exactly what you're talking about is he's not fitting into a category to become the exemplum of that category, and because of that he gets caught between the
Yeah, because
cracks,
like
maybe.
most people have heard of like Descartes, right? And so Descartes,
Hegel, Kant,
yeah, and so Descartes is a very famous rationalist.
Newton.
Yeah, and so
everyone else you mentioned, basically.
yeah. So Descartes was around the same time as Leibniz, but he was more in the rationalist tradition, very orthodox. But Leibniz took different variants of different traditions, so he couldn't really be placed, which is why I think he's not as well known. But he was very influential, as I mentioned. Kant and Hegel were both influenced by him. So, yeah.